for joining me. And if you haven't already, I'd like to ask you to please hit the subscribe button and give the video a like. It'll really help the channel grow. Today we'll be looking at a Class D GaN-Fet amplifier from Orchard Audio, the Starkrimson Stereo Ultra 2.5. This is their stereo amplifier, and it is available in various configurations, which we'll talk about later. And currently this configuration is coming in at $2,900. And I'd like to thank Mark over at Audio Pursuit, as well as Ed over at Old Guy Hi-Fi for connecting me with Orchard Audio. Thanks guys, I very much appreciate it. I'll put a link to their channels below, but if you follow me, you most likely follow them as well. But if you don't, you definitely should. So I'm slightly torn on this amp here. I very much love its sound quality, but the aesthetics aren't quite there for me. It has a few quirks that I think can be finessed out and would lead to a little more polished finished product. But overall, I'll tell you right now, I love this amplifier. Let's take a closer look. We get a fairly decent chassis, and on the inside here, this large block here is our power supply. Very well made. It looks like it is custom for Orchard Audio. They have their name silk screened on the board. And over here we have two amplifier boards. Just under these large inductors, we have the GaN-Fet chips, and it looks like we have a temperature probe on one of them. We have our filter caps up here, and then over on this side, we have this additional board, and this board is a conversion board. You'll see that on the back of the amp, you have some XLR ins and a set of XLR outs. Those XLRs are not pre-outs. What you do here is if you want to supply the amplifier a signal via RCA, that single-ended signal gets converted to XLR here, and then that XLR signal then goes out through those XLRs and back into the in XLRs of this amp. And I personally do not like this solution here. It just seems very DIY. And I know the nature of this brand does lend for a lot of DIY. However, on a finished product, I feel like this board and this whole process should have been done on the main board. But taking a step back, I can understand that this is a small company and they probably have a good amount of these boards that need to be sold before you can order new boards. And this is a way to add on a feature without scrapping all these completed boards or having them as back stock, because stock is money, and for a small company, that's all very important. But to tell you the truth, if I'm spending $3,000 on an amplifier, I really would have liked this to be integrated into the main board and have an RCA and an XLR in, and then a switch on the back to be able to select, or maybe a input selector switch on the front side to be able to toggle XLRs and RCAs there. Maybe that's something they can work on for a future revision. On the front of the amp, we have a simple on and off button. Press to power on, press again to power down. And again, I get that DIY feel with this kind of button. I've used these before on DIY projects, and at this price point of amp, I would have liked something more unique. We have our front panel, and I'm not a big branding guy or logo guy. So for myself, this large Orchard Audio logo is a little much, especially on the black. Maybe it's a little more subtle on the silver finish. And here we go back to that topic of this being a small company. You can get this front plate in black or silver without a logo. However, you're paying $300 extra, and I'm not gonna do that. That price does seem excessive. And once again, I get it, it's a small shop and they probably have to order those one at a time, but economies of scale, if they were to order more, you'd probably be able to get them cheaper. $300 to not have a logo, again, it seems excessive. And I actually wouldn't mind the logo if it was a little bit smaller. Looking at the rear, we have our binding posts, and they are pretty nice binding posts. You can upgrade to WBCs at an additional $300 currently. That's just what those guys go for though. Next to that, we have a little plate that covers up a hole, which we can use for an RCA. You can wire this up to have RCAs or XLRs, but once again, not both. It would be really cool if we took this mechanism and combined it onto that board so we'd be able to input select on the front. And under that little cover, we have our XLR in. Once again, over on this side, we have that RCA in. So you go RCA in, then you convert that to XLR out, which goes back over here, and we have a bunch of extra cables hanging out the back. Again, a more elegant solution would have been to have that wiring on the inside of the unit. So on to testing. All those little complaints aside, this is an amazing sounding amplifier, and I really do love it. This amp can output up to 250 watts per channel at 8 ohms or 500 watts per channel at 4 ohms. For testing, I started with my Cambridge Audio 851N streamer, going over to an SMSL DO200 Pro DAC, to my Jungsan JA1 preamp, over to the Starkrimson Ultra. The first thing I noticed was the speed of the bass. Tremendous speed, great control over the woofers. The next thing I noticed was the vocal clarity, crystal clear. And the third thing that I noticed was the increased soundstage compared to my daily driver, the Iota VX PA3. Next I decided to try with a different source to see if it would make a difference. And I connected the Yulong D39 streaming DAC. This one uses an ESS 9039 Pro DAC chip versus 12 Cirrus Logic chips in the DO200 Pro. And honestly, I did not like this combination. This gave me a much drier and sharper sound. Not aggressive, but a sense of too much detail. So I don't imagine that most ESS DACs would be a good pairing with this amplifier, unless you have a tube preamp that might be able to soften things up a touch. Because I really did like it with that DO200 Pro that's a little bit softer, and I'm sure it would do wonderful with an R2R DAC. But with that ESS, just too much of a good thing, I think. Too much clarity, too much sharpness, and maybe even a touch bright. For my third test, I decided to compare this $2,900 GaN-Fet amplifier to something more affordable. Apos Audio sent me over an SMSL PAX GaN-Fet amplifier, and that one comes in at $699, so under 1/3 of the cost of the Starkrimson in this configuration. That one able to supply up to 200 watts per channel at 8 ohms, so slightly less powerful than the Starkrimson. And my findings? The price for the Starkrimson is justified. The PAX cannot compete with something at this level right here. The biggest thing I can tell you that I hear automatically is that the Starkrimson just sounds more natural. The PAX is also an excellent amp. I'll have my review on that one soon, but it just isn't as natural as this amp right here. The bass quantity is similar, however it is edged out by the Ultra here. The bass on the Ultra is a little bit fatter, however they both have that good speed. The PAX presents slightly more forward, whereas the Ultra puts the vocalist right in the right position, or at least where I assume they'd be. Just a more believable presentation. The PAX gets a little bright in the highs, enough to say that I would like to EQ it down just a touch. With the Ultra, nothing that I would touch. And then we get to the soundstage. With the Ultra, everything is just a little bit wider, a little bit larger, deeper, more layered, generally better spacing all the way around. So from the $700 PAX to the $2,900 Starkrimson Ultra, you definitely have a superior amp here. Now, were those increases worth over $2,000 for the upgrade? Had I not heard it myself, I'd probably say no. But once you hear it, it's one of those things that you can't unhear, and I would definitely strive for the Ultra if I had the budget. And the great thing about Orchard Audio, because they are DIY friendly, you can upgrade this unit still in the future. You can order another power supply and set this up as a dual mono amplifier, and you might be able to get their capacitor upgrade boards. I know in the past they had offered that as an additional add-on. Maybe they're out of stock now because I don't see that in the DIY section currently. However, you can order a complete unit with that upgrade. And it looks like they also have a limited edition with linear power supplies and even greater capacitance. I'm super curious about that one now. Well, all in all, I think this is an incredible amplifier for the money. Will there be some changes that I would love to see? Yes, of course. But I'm mindful that it is a small company. But I love the fact that they have the DIY options as well. Leo, the designer and owner of Orchard Audio, has some wonderful videos on YouTube, super detailed, showing you how to build the DIY boards, how to get them wired up. If you buy the DIY version of the Ultra, you save yourself around $500. In following his videos, you'll probably be done assembling it within a day. Some soldering skill required. If you're good with woodworking or metalworking, you can build yourself a custom chassis and save yourself some money on a truly amazing sounding amplifier. It really is something else. Very impressive. Well, that's all I have for you on this one. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.